Oh yeah, that definitely needs to be replaced.
What's up, modifiers, and welcome to part 2 of lifting this Jeep WK. In today's video, we're going to get rid of that dragster raked look, or reverse squat, however you want to call it, and we're going to be getting this front end put up into the air. Now, if you guys remember in the last video, lifting this back end was not that hard. We did run into a few problems, one which is the track bar pushing the axle over slightly, which we still need to address. But other than that, the back end is pretty much done and it looks awesome. Now, as for the front end, we haven't done too much to it yet. We kind of took the caliper off and then we took the rotor off. Nothing big, disconnected the ABS or the wheel sensor, and now we're going to be tearing down into it furthermore, which, as you can see, has a lot more stuff attached to it compared to the back.
A little resistant, but it's moving, so that's a good sign.
Alrighty, boys, so we are moving right along on this project. As you've seen just a while ago, we pulled the nuts off the top of the studs of the shocks like so, and that's going to allow us to loosen everything up to pull out our lower control arm down there, which will be being replaced because the new one, it was just as cheap to come with a new bushing and ball joint, as well as our upper ball joint and that whole upper control arm up there along with the shock. So with all that loose, we'll be able to loosen a couple more things up and pull this whole section out. One other thing to keep in mind when you're doing this is if you're not pulling the axle shafts out, you're going to need to loosen that nut right there, which is already off right there actually, and that is a 36 millimeter. Now with us, we're actually going to have to lower the differential anyway to replace a bushing. Also as well, you don't want to forget to have a jack or something underneath the lower control arm support and everything when you take those nuts out, because if not, it's all going to fall out on you. Okay, so now we're taking out our lower control arm to the strut mount bolt, and this bolt can be kind of tricky. I'll kind of zoom in on it a little bit because these are the ones notorious for freezing up. Lucky for us, we didn't have that problem. That's just something you want to keep in mind when you're PB blasting everything.
Horrible.
Okay, and just like that, we got all those previously mentioned parts out. But one thing we were kind of concerned with initially was this bracket right here, which controls our camber and caster and adjustment. We were concerned that we were going to have to elongate the holes on the frame for these to actually align correctly, because we are putting the spacer blocks and raising it 2 inches. But from what we've seen, we're not going to have to do that, thankfully. And then also we got the brackets off the bottom of the shocks. They came off, you know, pretty easily. And now that only leaves us with taking the springs off these shocks and decompressing those, which I'm sure you guys know how much fun that's going to be. I just want to mention real quick that if you're just doing the lift and replacing the shocks, this is what you're going to look like. This is what it's going to look like. This is what you're going to see. So, you know, we got everything out. But for this project, we are actually having to go a step further and lower the center diff just to replace the bushings in there. So if your bushings are okay in the center differential, really, if you're doing a lift or any type of suspension work, this is as far as you have to go.
And stop. I got the differential. If you want to go ahead and take the axles, pull the jack stand, lower the axle gently. There we go. See how far it goes. Okay, we'll go get the other one. Oh yeah, lower it on down.
And here it is. This is the differential we were pulling out to replace these bushings right here. Now, as you can tell, these things are really kind of shot, as you can see the play in them. And this one right here as well. This one right here is actually cracked so bad that we can just easily push it out. When this bushing goes bad, you're going to have a lot of kind of vibration when you're shifting into gear and kind of moving, and you're going to feel it through the drivetrain. So it's really important that that bushing be replaced, and which henceforth why we pulled out the whole front differential. Alrighty, so we got that last bushing out with the help of a ball joint kit, and then this piston cup out of a 90s F350 brake caliper. But now with putting the new bushing back in, before they were mounted like this, which doesn't really make much sense because, you know, the beef of the bushing, this thicker part right here, is side to side. So instead, going back in, we're going to put it that way, so you know the bushing is getting the most material as far as up and down movement goes, and it won't wear as fast as the old ones. That's going to end it for the teardown process for this thing. So this thing will be ready to go back in. Now that leaves us with one more thing to tear down before we can start putting on all the new awesome parts. We're going to have to get these springs off here, and they are loaded under some pressure.
Whew, okay. Wasn't that bad.
Now, if you guys didn't have to replace the bushings on the axle, you're going to basically kind of skip over that last prior portion, and it's going to take us right over to this. Right here is the spacer and then the upper mount, which we'll be assembling and putting on our brand new Bilstein shock with our new covers, which actually did not come with the shocks. We had to buy these separate. Now, if you remember earlier in the video, we said we were going to have to actually grind these studs down a little bit because, you know, that's what the directions said. But as far as we can see, we have plenty of clearance, so that's one less thing we have to do. Just make sure you get your nuts on there before you tighten all of them down.
Because there's a washer in there, that washer fits on top of the stud on shoulders, and Bilstein shocks are the ones who are notorious for doing it. So I want the upper mount to fit down onto the washer. That way I know I'm bottomed out, then I can go and tighten the nut, then I can take the spring compressors off.
Okay, so a little update. We haven't killed ourselves with the spring compressors yet, but we did have to take off the spacer block, because once you get the nut down on that shock tower stud, it starts rotating the whole shaft of it because there's nothing really keeping it in place but the part up there that's made to put a wrench on, and with that in the way, you can't get a wrench in there to tighten down the nut. So don't put your spacer on until you have the spring on, compressed and bolted down. So now with the other one, luckily we haven't put it together yet, so we know that, but we're just gonna have to put that one back on last. So really the spacer is the last thing that goes on.
There, so those bolts are in. I can put the spring in. Not worry about that. Bottom end first over that.
Okay.
Watching the top of the bottom of the fender.
It's kind of heavy, but all right.
Yeah, that one. Nice and easy.
Down.
Back.
So we're pretty much making some good headway. We got the upper control arms in. Those were pretty easy, 2 bolts on each, or 2 bolts total, 1 on each side. And as you see, we've got the strut back up in there, which is actually going through the spacer now, or the spacer is what's going through the fender now, and that's what we're bolting onto, because if you remember, we already bolted onto the strut itself. Okay guys, one thing to note is when you're putting this lower control arm in, make sure that this bushing is up and the ball joint stud is face down. Also, since the strut is fully decompressed all the way down, you're going to have to take like a solid rod, like right there on the ground while somebody's holding it, and bend this joint downward, because it's so new, it's really tight to bend, because it goes on top of the frame on the mount instead of upside down like you would think it would go like that. Putting everything back together, this is the part that gets a little bit tricky. Now, as you can see, we have some clamps, or some spring clamps, back on the struts, and the reason for that is this shock tower fork right here has to get lined up with the holes prior, and since the lower control arm's so far down, it's actually hit, and let me show you guys. This tab right here is actually hitting on our drive axle. So the correct procedure is get some spring clamps, put them up, you know, tighten them down, get the spring compressed, and then this outer hub assembly here will be the first thing to go on, aka the bottom ball joint down there. And once you have that on, tighten it up a little bit. You don't have to torque it just yet, or I wouldn't advise it actually. And then what you're going to do is, as you're doing that, slide your drive axle back into the hub itself and put the nut on that. Then once that is done, you'll be able to get the fork for the strut lined up with the holes down there, get it on, and then get a jack up under this and jack it up to get attached to the upper control arm. So we've run into a bit of a problem. When we were putting some of the stuff together, we found that the hub assembly right here is actually contacting our strut back here. Now, we didn't notice that on the old setup, which, you know, we didn't have that spacer in there, but from what we can figure out is because the strut's putting full force on the lower control arm, it's actually pushing it back, because that's where you adjust for the camber, caster, you know, your alignment stuff. And we have all that stuff loose right now. Now, we could tighten that stuff up, but the problem is it would stay permanently pushed in, and it would contact that. So what we're having to do is go through, put some stuff back together, put it on the stock wheels, lower it, so we can get it pushed out, and then tighten everything up. And hopefully, just hopefully, that'll fix our problem. Little update on our problem. We have the lower control arms pushed all the way out now. You know, basically that's what's done for the alignment like we were talking about earlier, and our problem is still there. If you can see right behind, look at that, it is touching. Now, right now, it's actually on the weight of the wheels, or if the wheels were on it, because that's where we have the jacks. Now, with the wheels on it, it'll push it out a little bit more, so, you know, leverage-wise, it'll kind of put it in a teeny bit more, but really, that's just not going to work as far as the amount of room we have between that assembly and then the strut itself. I mean, you can't even turn it without it, you know, moving the whole strut. With that said, we've done as much research, we've called around, and there seems to be no answer, or no clear answer at least, on how to fix this. So really the only thing to do now, since we've come this far, is to continue on, and we found a local Jeep shop that specializes in Jeeps, and we're going to take it there, or we're going to have to take it there anyway for the alignment, and maybe they can point us in the right direction. Continuing on as planned, over here we got going on is new tie rod ends. As you can see right there, those are kind of angled pretty aggressively as well with the rest of the suspension, which leads us to believe as well that something's just not right. But we've gone through, we've double, triple checked our work, and everything's installed correctly. So at this point, we're at a loss. Right now we're going back in with the fuse panel boxes and the computer modules and all that stuff that covered up the nuts for the struts. And so far the Jeep is on its wheels and it looks right as far as measurements go, but the angles of some of our ball joints and our steering components are still concerning, and that's something that's just going to have to be checked out when we take it to be aligned here in a few minutes. Okay guys, this Jeep turned out so nice. I mean, it looks awesome. And we were worried about, you know, the spindle touching the shock or the strut, but now take a look at this. Once everything got settled and rolled out, we've got plenty of space behind there now. Even at full turn and full lock, it's still same as far as space goes. Now, if you've heard behind me, we've got the AMG starting up because I'm gonna have to follow Dad there and that to the alignment shop because it still needs an alignment. Alrighty boys, it's always a great day when you get to drive the AMG. So now it's time to head out. You see a bunch of lifted Jeeps even around the other side of this one, so you know what that means. We're here. I am super excited to show you guys the final product of the diesel Grand Cherokee. Now, what better place to showcase it in its awesome glory and incredibleness than, well, out in the middle of an old logging road. So that's what we got, guys. Personally, I think the thing looks awesome. The 2-inch lift really lifts it up just the right amount, and the Wrangler wheels just really bring it together with the black and the black on the rest of the Jeep, because as you know, this is the Laredo package, not the Limited, so it's got the black theme going out through the rest of it, and those wheels just really tie together. It almost looks like this was some type of Trailhawk package like they have on the newer Grands. I mean, it just looks insanely nice, in my personal opinion. Now, the best part about this build is it wasn't even that expensive. I mean, you've got the Bilstein shocks, which were probably the most expensive, which you could substitute out for really anything you'd want to use. And then, well, you've got some spacer blocks. We used the original springs, some new bushings here and there. If you guys need that, that's something that's kind of serviceable that you can use your discretion if you want to upgrade. And then the Wrangler wheels. Those Wrangler wheels, let me tell you, we've got 5 of them, 5 full-size Wrangler wheels and tires that came with all that. and the price for all 5 of those with good tires was half of what putting new tires on that Jeep. Just four new tires, half the price. So you can't beat that. Now this is going to close out that project on the diesel Grand, but for those of you that can't get enough of this thing, do not worry, it'll be continued to be featured along with our Cummins content. But with all that said, make sure you guys like, subscribe, maybe comment, tell me what you think of the lift, and I'll